Welcome to 3 Peas in a Pod, episode 220. We made it. I realized I kept thinking, why does this sound so much different than Jason? I've not been saying greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. I could not remember until we did it. What does Jason say at the beginning of this? So if you're listening to this and not watching, Jason is not with us still. This is still in the middle of our Jason fast. Yep. From the podcast. Jason is taking the day off of work.
We miss Jason.
We do miss Jason. We miss Jason. So we're going to be glad to have him back. But yeah, this is episode 220, and we last week talked about a whole bunch of questions. This week we've got 2 questions we're going to try and bring together here because our goal is we want to clear the deck. We had a whole bunch of questions come in.
We give Jason a clean slate.
That's right. Let him come back in. So what that means is we're going to need more questions from you guys. So you'll see in the description of the podcast or the show notes. That's what Molly calls it on the Not Great Parents. She calls them show notes, which feels
I like that.
A little more fancy. On the show notes.
Well, any podcast I'm in versus any podcast Molly's in, definitely Molly's fancier.
Lot fancier.
On the whole Community Christian staff, I'm on the low end of fancy.
And she's on the higher end.
I'm on the lowest end of fancy.
That's true. So on the show notes, you'll see a form a link to a form where you can ask us a question. We'd be happy to answer those. Today, we've got 2 different ones, but they are very similar. I think they're taking 2 different types of people that they're trying to do, but both have to do with how do we share our faith in God in a way that is, I would say, winsome to the person. That is not offensive, doesn't push the person away. So I'm going to read the questions and we'll get started. So here's the first question.
We're doing them both, or we're going to do them separately?
I'll read the first one, then if we have any specific comments about this one, and then I'll quickly get to the second one. But here we go. I have gotten some Mormon and Jehovah Witnesses come to my door to witness to me.
Move. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Can you give me some suggestions on how, as a Christian, I should talk to them? What are the fundamental differences between us, and I assume they mean between religions, when they end the conversation with asking if it's okay to pray for me? How should I respond? It feels weird because I feel like they are praying to a God I don't believe in. So I thought when you said that, do you not have, proselytizers come to your door?
No solicitation in my neighborhood.
Okay.
And it's posted, but somehow roofers don't count.
Yeah, honestly, the roofers are a little more annoying to me than the Mormon.
I would almost take a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon over a roofer.
Yeah. So yeah, I get Jehovah's Witnesses at my in my neighborhood, but I haven't had any door-to-door Mormons. I've met a few, because I will say this: when we go serve at Bridging the Gap, there are several Mormon missionaries who come, both male and female. They come from different, I believe, temples is what they refer to their.
Mormons, I think meeting houses.
Okay. I don't know.
I think there are only a few temples in the world.
This is going to get to our fundamental difference. We're not going to be able to speak too educatedly on it.
Well, I'm pretty sure they're only I may be wrong on that, but I believe they're meeting houses.
Okay. Well, either way, they've been there and they've been very friendly and very helpful.
I'll say this about coming to my house, including any of you who watch or people who know me personally, you should text. You should.
Don't come to my front door.
I don't answer.
Yeah.
Even if I may be sitting 10 feet on the other side of that door. If you knock on that door, I assume it's Amazon.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Or somebody delivering something. I will get to that door when I want to get to that door. But if you come and you know me, you should say, "Hey, Ed," and then you say your name. I may still not come, but you at least gave me the best shot of coming.
Yes. So here's what I'd say. Here's the part, and before I read the next question, which I think is very similar, it's just a different kind of approach to it. I would not try to focus too much on the fundamental differences in what we believe. And here's what I mean is that is their approach to evangelism.
Well, and I'll say this, they are counting on the fact that you don't know what you believe.
Correct.
They are counting on that fact.
And so their goal is to say, hey, here's the places that we sort of agree, but here's the things you don't know. And here's the things you don't see. And when you try that same approach, one, they're probably better trained than you are.
They're certainly better trained on what they believe than you are on what you believe, most likely for most of you.
And so my approach would not be, if my goal is really, hey, I have a heart for this person, my goal would not be, hey, in one conversation, I'm going to convince them that, that my belief on Jesus is more correct than their belief on who Jesus is. But if you have a relationship that goes beyond this 30-minute conversation that you're going to have, there might be ways to approach that. As far as is it okay for them to pray for me? If what you mean is God going to be upset with you that they pray? No. And I think it's okay honestly, if I had a Muslim friend that said, hey, Nathan, I know that your daughter's sick and I prayed for her, I wouldn't go, please don't. Jesus might find out and he's going to be mad at you.
I do have a Muslim next door neighbor for me that prays for me.
That's what I mean, is because in the same way, just as there was a guy at the gym today that I hadn't seen in a long time. I don't know where his faith is, but I said to him, hey, I'm so glad I saw you. I've been praying for you the last 2 weeks because I haven't seen you. And I was hoping nothing bad happened. And he said to me, man, that actually means a lot to me that you noticed and that you prayed. Now, I don't know what his faith is. We didn't get into that. But I'm assuming even if he's an atheist, he sees the heart behind what I said. And he was honored by that. And I think in a similar way, certainly Jesus is not so ticky-tacky that if he found out someone who doesn't believe in him prayed to a different God, that he's going to go, somehow he's going to punish you for that.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay. And I would encourage you to pray for them.
I think the whole thing you said about relationships, I think is the important thing. If you're willing to have a relationship with the person, one, I would try to take it away from the ground that they want to be on, which is, I come to your house, we meet at your house. I'd invite them to go meet somewhere else. Let's become friends. Let's talk about more than this. I'd ask them about their family. Mm-hmm. I'd ask them I would try to find out, I would try to develop a real relationship with people. My experience in doing both forms, because I was trained in a door-to-door. I mean, there was a time when Christianity did lots of, I guess maybe some churches.
I have had when I lived in Grantville, there was a local Baptist church that they would come to and they would want to preach the gospel to us.
Yeah, anyway, I've been trained in that format of you go to the door, you can be pretty sure most of the people there don't know what they really think about things. You try to get them to say the right things to get to the end result. And it's more like a sales call than it is like a relationship. I don't believe that's the way of Jesus. The longer I've walked with Jesus, I just don't believe that's the way of Jesus. I don't see Jesus doing that kind of thing where he's making sales calls on people, try to get them to an end result in a short amount of time. So if you're willing to have a relationship, my experience is in relationships, the best way to figure out what people believe is, one, you just ask questions and you watch their life. Dallas Willard had a statement that I love the way, and people, I think, missed what he means by it sometimes, is truth is what you run into when you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And when people have a belief about God, life has a way of showing you that your belief didn't work out.
Right.
And that's where you have the opportunity, if you're in a relationship with somebody, just to ask questions. Well, I thought you believed X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. Well, I thought if you did this, this is supposed to happen. That's where you can have the chance. But in a door-to-door conversation where they have a list of beliefs that they want to push into you and you want to question it so you can push beliefs back at them, that's not really that's not what I would want to encourage anybody in Christianity to do. No. I'd pray for them on the spot if they're willing to. I'd say, can I pray for you? I'm not really if they do come to my door, call out my name, and I happen to answer the door, and in the past, back when I did answer doors, I would just say to them, hey, I'm really not interested. I'm a pastor at a church, but I'd be willing to pray for you as you go. And I would always pray that God would reveal the truth to them while they were out sharing.
Yeah. And I think that relational evangelism is really the thing. And that'll get to our second question here. I think that's the goal, because one thing I would say too is, our command is the Great Commission tells us to go and make disciples. In another version, in Acts, he says to go and be my witnesses. And often we think that what that means is that what God is most interested in is how many converts we can get to the religion. How many people can I get who don't believe in Jesus to believe in Jesus, be baptized, and to do what he wants me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts a lot of pressure on relationships that when I think that's what God's most interested in, it becomes a very quid pro quo kind of relationship of I do this for you and then you believe what I want to do, or God, and that's what God's doing with me. He's kind of measuring my quota of how many people you've gotten. And it really makes it difficult then to have genuine relationships like we see Jesus have with people. And I think we forget this. We see Jesus healing and going to all kinds of towns and villages and proclaiming the gospel and healing people. Says he's driving out demons all the time. But by the time he rises from the dead, only 120, we know he appears to 500, but only 120 people come back to actually start the church.
Right.
Which means Jesus must have healed a whole bunch of people, proclaimed the gospel to a whole bunch of people, loved and gone to parties with people and been friends with people that never believed in him as the Son of God enough to become his disciple.
Even though they saw all the wonders that he did.
Right. And so similar to, and I had this conversation with one of my daughters the other day, because she's trying to figure out her faith and whether, she's ready to be baptized. So we were having those kind of conversations. And I just said to her, because she struggles with some of the things. And I said, I want to make clear, because I can see she knows how much this matters to me. I said, this does matter to me. And we were talking about her prayer time in the morning. I said, because I'm your dad and because you live in my house, we're going to have a prayer time every day. And that may not mean anything to you, but because it means something to me, that's what it's going to be. But I said to her, just so you know, I want you to love Jesus and I want you to follow Jesus. But if you never follow Jesus, you are always my daughter. I will want to be in your life for the rest of your life and love you. And as long as I'm alive, I want to be friends with you and love you, even if you never follow Jesus. I don't want it to be this, if I don't do this, my dad's going to be mad at me kind of thing. Well, I want that for every other person in my life too.
Well, and what you just did there was you were a living example. And throughout the two of your relationships, I mean, she's my granddaughter, so I hope it doesn't go this way.
Right.
But if she's 40 years old and she still hasn't come to love Jesus, she will either have a living demonstration that what you said to her, which is the exact relationship that God has with every person.
He keeps blessing and
God
loving.
blesses every person no matter what they believe.
Yes.
God does not bless people who have the correct beliefs more than he blesses people who don't have the correct beliefs. And so you are living an active demonstration of who God is, which is a part of what living the gospel means.
That's right. And that's a long term, if she does choose to follow Jesus, that sets her up to be a disciple of his better than getting all the missionary things of the Romans road and all these different things, which just teach her intellectual things she needs to know to be saved. She's better set up to be a disciple when she understands that God is the kind of God who doesn't force things on me, who wants to love me and serve me. And then when I become his disciple, he expects me to do the same thing, which then gets to our next question. So I hope that answers the specific parts, but I think the next question.
I will say this, you wanted to know what they believe about certain things. That's not really the nature of this podcast, but there are a lot of places you can figure that out. Mainly, their differences are in the view of God. Almost every religion in the world, what the main difference is, you know how we have said, all three of our speakers here, we've said at different times, what you think about God matters more than,
it's the most important thing.
Most important thing about you. That inevitably is the major difference in almost it all flows out of that. It all flows out, and they have different books, even though they may use the Bible as well.
Right.
They're different texts, but it all flows out of a view of God.
And in particular, their view of who Jesus is drastically different. And so if you're asking, and I'm glad you said that, because I don't want it to sound like, because I know that certain missionaries in that, they'll even sometimes refer to themselves as, well, we're Christians too. We believe there's a distinction in what they think about Jesus, similar to Judaism, in that they worship the God of Abraham and Jacob, but they don't believe Jesus
Right.
is who we believe Jesus is, part of the Trinity. They don't believe in that, and so it is distinct. It is not the same. It is a difference. But
I mean, if you want to ask that, is Jesus the same as God?
Yeah, same substance as
The same-
God.
Does he have all the same abilities as God? Is he a part of God? He's not lower than God? He's not.
He wasn't
high-
created
He
by
isn't
God.
created by God. He isn't. The Son of God does not make him lower than God.
Right.
He's the same. The Holy Spirit. That is distinct about Christianity.
Yes, and in particular, though they may, both Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness will use the name of Jesus, and they believe in Jesus as a person, they have distinctions on what they think about him being part of the Godhead or the Trinity, and that's a distinction, and that's a really important distinction. It's not a small distinction; it is an important one.
It's the deal.
Yeah, it is what we believe. All right, so this gets to our other one, which I think gets to what we just talked about what people believe about God. But this is a person who may have grown up in Christianity. So it says, during Easter Sunday service, I was struck with feelings that I've had a lot and don't know how to deal with. So many people have an inaccurate perspective of Jesus, which has been shown to them through Christians who likely don't know how wrong they are in delivering wrath-filled messages of an angry God and focusing on heaven as the only reward for Jesus' followers. Now, before I get to the end of the question, I just want to say good for you that you've been able to distinguish that is not Jesus' message, because you are right. That is, I wouldn't say, maybe not predominant, but it's a big message in American Christianity, that God is angry at us and full of wrath towards us. Then this person said, I have friends who are burnt by these messages and automatically shut down to the thought of even talking about Jesus. How do we reach those who have been hurt by the false teaching of other Christians? How do I bring my friends into the truth of his love? So similar to our previous question, you're talking to a person who has a wrong opinion of God. But unlike receiving these messages through, a formal other religion, they receive it from people who do believe Jesus is the Son of God. He is part of the Trinity. They believe in like the central idea that we believe in, but their view of God and what Jesus was doing is primarily one about an angry God who is angry at you because of your sin.
Well, I come to realize it for me, because I was certainly raised that way or around that. I mean, that's predominant thing of the American South, evangelical religion. And it's not even just that God's angry. God's very transactional.
Right.
That's the way I would think in terms of it now. I don't know that I could put it in those words, but you do good, God does good. You do bad, God does. God has to do some bad things to get his message.
I'm trying not to caricature the image of, even though I just kind of made a caricature of it. They are taking the language in Romans that is legal language, but is really the only place where salvation is talked about in legal language.
Yeah, God is relational.
Yes, and they've made it the entire point of what Jesus does, of saying it's almost karmic. It's almost karma of God. God has to balance the scales. There's so much bad, there has to be so much of this other stuff that takes place.
Yeah, and there are a lot of really scholarly ways to talk about this and tear it down, but that's not what you asked. You asked about reaching your friends. I'd be very careful about trying to reach anybody who had been raised in that kind of thing in any way that's not relational.
Correct.
And what I mean is, you want to teach them about a relational God, you must be exceptionally relational. You must, and then that in a relationship, that doesn't mean that when they say something that you don't go, well, that's not right. I often disagree with people that I'm in loving relationship with. It doesn't mean you don't say, well, that's not exactly the Bible, what the Bible says. And there are a lot of places you can point out that that's not exactly the God that Jesus revealed that we should call Father.
That's
Even the fact that he told us we should call him Father.
right.
And it's not even that Jesus introduced it. In the Old Testament,
That's
they
right.
called him Father as well. It just needs to be very relational, not cut and dried. Here's what you believe. Here's what they got wrong. Here's what you need to understand. Why don't you come and see how wrong they were and now how wrong you are?
That's right. And
It has to be really, really relational. And again, like I said on the other one, the easiest thing is not the easiest. It's never easy because there's damage done, there's hurt done. Is praying, asking the Lord to lead you, asking him every time you're with him, asking him to help you to say the right thing, to open doors, to lead you into relationships, but constantly asking questions of how's what you're doing right now working for you? How is what is it you think about God? What is, do you just not think about God now? How do you think all of this came about? I don't know that there's a way other than relationship to get it done. There's no quick way to get it done.
Well, and I think once again you have to remove the barrier of my job is to get them to change their mind about God. I do think it's important to say, and I recently was reading a book about this, that they were talking about that Jesus' primary goal was to fix that. What he was primarily doing in the gospel of the kingdom is that he is trying to change the way people think about God, that he is trying to explain, like you said, the language of Father had already been applied, but they started kind of thinking him as this kind of retributive kind of father of like, well, I'll do for you if you do for me, and you behave the right way and I'll treat you nice.
And unfortunately, there are plenty of examples like that,
Sure.
Not just in the Eastern, a lot of Southern families are
That's
that
right.
way.
That's right. And so they begin to kind of think it that way. And Jesus goes, no, I'm trying to say, he's the kind of father, and he says at one point to him, none of you fathers, and I love the way he says it, because we all even talk about, every parent knows how to love their kids well. And Jesus goes, now you guys are evil and wicked.
Right.
And he goes, all you parents are evil and wicked, but even you evil, wicked, dumb parents know that if your kid asks you for bread, you don't give them a rock. And if they ask you for a fish, you don't give them a snake. And, he kind of takes them and goes, even the worst parent would know that's wrong. Now they may do it because they're full of wrath and they're full of all these things, but they know that's not it. Don't you think your father, when you ask him for stuff? And I believe the people there then could start to, and we see this when he talks to the people on the road to Emmaus, he would open their minds to the scriptures. I think they then would start thinking through the Old Testament and the way that they were raised, and they go, oh, that is right. He did, when Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, God stepped in and said, no, we're not going to do that. And, he provided manna for us in the wilderness. Oh, that's right. They were able then to see what they were taught. In the same way, that's the way I would try and approach it with my friend I would try to behave in a way that they had never seen Christians. They've grown up around Christians, and they have seen, if you believe that God is full of wrath and constantly having to correct every little sin and be angry about every little sin, that creates a kind of Christian. It does, which is why often the churches that are most hardest on that of, sinners in the hands of an angry God, and he's coming for you and he's going to get you. Those are often the churches that, and maybe you've been in those churches, where everyone's pretty grumpy and pretty judgmental and pretty critical. Not because, and I think we have to see, it's not because they're bad people, because they are living out the image of the God they have, which is, as long as you do the right things, then we can be loving and accepting in that. But until then, I have to show you how wicked you are.
Right.
In order, and I believe, and if you talk to people who are in those churches, they'll say that's what love looks like. Because this is what God does for us. He gave us the law to tell us how wicked and evil and horrible we are so that he could bring us in. And in the book of Romans, where that's often what they point to, he talks about, hey, the law shows us our wickedness. And then he says, but don't you know that it was the kindness of God that brought you? Paul is almost setting that up as, okay, maybe. In fact, I just recently heard a scholar say that Paul, and this is something we're learning now in scholarship, it's a lot of things that people think Paul is saying is most likely Paul's actually quoting another person. And he's saying, this scholar believes, Paul is actually quoting another person there when he says, God shows you all this to show you how wicked he is and his wrath's going to get poured out. And then he goes, yeah, but it's the kindness of God that leads to repentance.
Right.
And so he's saying, and this is the way. And then in Romans 12, at the end of it, he then says, and then your posture when someone is wicked towards you is to bless those who persecute you. And that somehow through being kind to those, it will shame them and not like, ooh, that'll get them in a way that, and you've been in those situations where someone wronged you and you decided, I'm going to blow up, I'm going to make them feel so bad. And then they turn, you yell and you scream, you belittle them, and you do that. And that person goes, wow, I'm really sorry. And you immediately go, whoo, I took that too far.
That's right.
I was expecting you to come back at me with the same energy. And when you didn't, it actually shamed me a little bit. And it made me realize, wow, I took this too far. And Paul says, that's the way. Well, that's an image of God issue. So if you become the kind of person through relationship that's full of grace, that's patient with the person, and maybe you do invite them, okay, hey, you should come to church with me. And when they say no, you don't go, well, okay, I guess you're going to hell. Because you're going to have all that. When you just go, okay, I understand. I know that you've been hurt. And so I get it. The door is always open if you want to come. There are no expectations on my part. That changes their perception.
And you need to make really sure that you don't get into the thing that is a part of that transactional view. The gospel in the kingdom is a whole life event. And people often get into, well, this applies to the way the church and God and my spiritual life, but I can be mean and nasty to people in business, or I can be transactional in that kind of thing. I can be that way in politics. I can be that way about people that oppose me, all those kind of things. I have to demonstrate, part of is I am a witness of Christ in every part of my life. And so I am witnessing the reality of the kingdom to the people who know me in every situation.
Yes.
In every single situation, I am doing that so that I'm talking about Jesus and demonstrating that even when we're not talking about Jesus and God. But when I live in that transactional world, I think it is why, and nobody intends this, but it is the downside of getting some things wrong. In churches where it's about getting you to pray a prayer or be baptized, it can be either one of those, where there's a transaction that takes place, and then you go to heaven. Well, nobody worries if you're the same grumpy person 40 years later, because after all of that's going to get fixed in heaven, we guess, because you're going to heaven no matter what. But that's not the nature of a relationship with a God who changes you. But when you believe that kind of thing, so we just have to be really careful. I'm constantly living out the gospel.
Yeah.
I'm being the person before them. I am a witness of Christ. That is a part of the interactive life that God lives with me, is that I am Jesus in that place. It's not that Jesus wants to live my life. I want to live the life that Jesus would live if he were in my life.
That's right. Well, and that I believe he's living with this person. If I believe, and I think you are. I thought it on Sunday. This Sunday was Easter Sunday, and we had that great video with the interviews that we had. And Miss Sophia was talking about her work and Meals on Wheels. And the question that you don't get to see is obviously we have a longer conversation, me and her back and forth. And I just said, I'm sure there are times where it feels like maybe this work doesn't mean much because you're just bringing a meal to a person. You're just doing this. And her response, which you did get to hear, is when she said, I've had people pass on. But I think for the time that I was with them, bringing that little bit of joy, being able to share jokes, someone knows their name and they know my name. They know someone cares about them. She said, I think all that's God's work. And I said, of course it's God's work because you believe, hopefully. I think the difference between an angry God who's waiting until you figure out the right intellectual thing to believe and the right prayer to pray, and then I'll be loving and kind towards you, and the God we believe in who is constantly blessing. We believe in a God who is with even a person who's completely alone, a person who is all on their own, and maybe Meals on Wheels can't even get to that person. We believe God is sitting there loving and blessing that person with them. And when you come to bring a meal and bring joy to them, you're just joining the life, as Ed said on Sunday, that he is currently living. Jesus is currently loving and serving that person. And if I take off the expectation that if I do enough meals, they'll pray the prayer and they get to go to heaven when they die. That's not my goal. My goal is I'm a person who loves God. So I want to be wherever he is, doing what he's doing, and he's currently loving you. So I'm going to love you without the expectation that you will turn to me. But the hope is, as you've said, if they see a full demonstration, which is I love you and I just want to serve you and I want to take care of you, then eventually they may go, God, that's a life I want to be a part of.
Yeah, and just the biggest thing as well is be as relaxed as you can about the whole thing, because I don't know if it's a kid or whoever it is, but you should just, God's relaxed about this situation.
Yes.
God feels as bad about the misimages that we're giving, and he's still okay.
Yes.
He still loves that person. He is still working with that person. He is actively reaching to that person, and we're just joining in on it. So don't go into it anxious in any kind of way. I really appreciate what you're trying to do. It is our work. It is the work that we are trying to do together.
So I hope that's helpful. If not, send some other questions in. This is something we are actively at work in. We have a group of people, we call it On Mission around here, where we are trying to train people, because this is a new way of thinking for many of us who grew up in the church. Of this is not a transaction, it's a lifetime process of constantly gospeling or evangelizing, because all of us need it. That there are times, I mean, that was my hope this past Easter, is that when people came, even people who were full disciples of Jesus, that you would be reminded of the good news that Jesus is with you and that he's for you and that he's inviting you into a life. Because so much of this life is difficult to remember that. And so all of us just need to be constantly be reminded of that. So I hope you're able to do that for your friend, and in all things, that you would just be relational and full of grace about it. So next week we'll have another question for you guys, but we've only got one question left right now in the queue. So send us another one, and we'd love to have that for future episodes. Thank you guys. See you next time.